He is also the director of the Aloha Freedom Coalition, which took a stance against COVID mandates and rules, and he's joining us live this morning. Good morning to you.
Aloha, how are you?
I'm doing fine. I wanted to start off by just asking you a little bit more about the Aloha Freedom Coalition and what that represents.
Well, great question. I actually have no video, but the Aloha Freedom Coalition really represents Aloha for the people of Hawaii. It's not taking a stand on anything other than the liberties for the people. Its inception was really designed to give the people their voice and allow them to actually express what it meant to be free. We've never taken a stand, or I'm not a part of AFC anymore as a director. Aloha Freedom Coalition has never taken a stand about telling people what they should or shouldn't do. They're just simply saying and declaring that the government does not have the right to tell them what they must put in their body. And so that, in a nutshell, seems to have generated a fair amount of controversy. But I think we all agree that liberty and freedom is the basis for all that we have.
For you personally, does that also extend to all vaccinations, that you should have the right to choose, including smallpox, flu, whatever it might be?
Well, I think most of those protocols are done when our kids are little. I mean, I'm a parent. My kids are 35 and 36 now. They went through the vaccine protocols, and I think there's some reluctance in the public in general seeing the effects of those. I'm personally not opposed to vaccines that make sense, that there's actual science, that there's a cause and effect, that they actually perform what they're intended to do. So for me personally, no, that's not true.
Okay, so explain to me then where the disconnect is then with the COVID vaccine versus the other ones, the protocols that you call for younger children that you are required to take for schools.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's the question that's mystified the entire world. You know, we've seen over time and heard declarations from the CDC and the FDA that these protocols are safe and effective, and now we find out that they're neither safe nor effective. We found it over time that many people who are sick now with COVID have already had the vaccine. So it just reveals the fact that the actual quote unquote science is not proven to be true. So, I mean, the distinction is that the people of Hawaii care about what goes into their body. They trust their natural immune system. We have a natural immune system that restrains these kinds of diseases or sicknesses, 99% effective. Yet we're proposing that these vaccines should be given to the population in general, and in particular the youth, when they can hardly catch COVID or its variants. It's almost impossible. And the consequences, even when they do catch it, are so minimal that the idea that we would actually do this and not consider the long-term effects, that really is the problem.
So do you feel that your immune system is strong enough to defend against COVID, but not for something like mumps, so you would need that vaccine? I'm just trying to understand.
Well, that's a good question. You're gonna have to restate the question. I didn't hear the last part.
That's okay. I'm just trying to understand. You're saying that your immune system is strong enough to where we don't necessarily need a COVID vaccine, correct?
That's right.
Okay, so if that's the case, then do we not also need vaccines for smallpox or mumps? Is our immune system not strong enough for those types of diseases? I'm just trying to understand.
Well, that's a good question. Unfortunately, I'm not a doctor. I haven't studied those things. That's a good question. I could get back to you with the answer. I think that we've seen some are precautionary and they can be avoided. The problem with the COVID vaccine is it was never tested against the COVID SARS-2 infection in the first place. They've never identified COVID SARS-2. So to develop a vaccine has been the issue. The PCR test never had a baseline based on SARS-CoV-2. Therefore, when they try to test people to find out whether they're positive or not, it's not based on SARS-CoV-2. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, nor am I saying that it's not very hard and honestly fatal for some people. That doesn't change those realities, though.
If you're elected for governor, we have dropped most of our COVID restrictions now. Is that something that you would maintain, no COVID restrictions, even if there was, say, another variant that popped up?
Well, I think you see nationally and internationally that people who are actually managing these things differently than Hawaii, they've seen the fact that if you'd allow therapeutics into the marketplace, if you'd allow the doctor-patient relationship to be as it was pre-COVID, if you had protocols in the hospital that actually address the symptoms rather than running people through a protocol, you would see something more like the flu. So would I continue to dismiss or not impose mandates? Yes, I would. I would not do that. I don't believe that that's accurate.
Okay, so I'm a little confused. So what I'm asking is about COVID restrictions. If you're elected as governor, is that something that you would drop completely?
Yes, I would drop the restrictions. That's right.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Let's move on to something else. You know, affordable housing has become such a big issue here in Hawaii. We know so many families are forced to leave to try to make ends meet on the mainland because they just can't do it here. If you're elected, what would you do to try to control some of the costs that we are seeing here on the islands?
Well, I mean, my campaign is rooted in that very fact. 3.5 years ago, my kids saw the writing on the wall. I have 7 grandkids. They had conversation. They said, we cannot survive in this crushing economy where the government is now consuming the wealth of the people. This is the underlying issue of all the struggles that we have in our state, including housing. So if you were to remove regulations, restrictions, you opened up through DLNR ag properties that would allow for more multi-use housing. If you allowed multi-use housing in the urban areas, these kinds of policies, if you would lower the cost of goods and services, then you would find the cost of housing begin to decline. It's not going to happen overnight, but strategic plans through DLNR, through zoning, through smart policy by reducing taxes, burdens, unemployment, workman's comp, all of these kinds of things burden business and keep them from being profitable. The only option they have is to increase costs. That cost there's a direct link between bad policy from our administration to the cost of housing. But it didn't just start overnight. This has been going on for decades. And essentially, the state is so top heavy that it's consuming the wealth of the people. And you see that in the lives of the people, that you go to the grocery stores, $200 a bag for groceries. You go to the gas station. I filled my Honda up yesterday. Almost $90 to fill my Honda with gas. Why? Transportation issues, taxation issues, fees, regulations. So the cost of housing, a systemic problem is the underlying cost of living. There's a lot of things that can be done. I'm a contractor. I'm not a politician. I'm a building contractor. So when you look at the way that the zoning is configured, there's a lot of opportunities to change the cost of living here in Hawaii.
What about for tourism? It seems like there's been a debate about how to manage something that really feeds our economy. Do you have any thoughts on how to manage that in our state?
That's a difficult question. Over the last several decades, what we've seen in Hawaii, you've seen business be pushed out of Hawaii. We no longer have an ag industry. We no longer have a poultry, a dairy, a beef industry. And so the base, the ability for the Hawaiian people to produce goods for sale in the marketplace and provide for themselves has been diminished. At the same time, the dependency on tourism has increased. It has to make up the difference. There's a lot of people that are very, very concerned, including myself, about the flood of tourists, 5, 6, 7 million tourists a year, all putting strains on our economy. Is tourism wonderful? Absolutely. I love the people who come here. Is there a good strategy from a policy level from the legislative branch or the executive branch or the tourism authority? No, there's not. It's not comprehensive because it doesn't take into account what's been happening in the other areas of our economy. We must open up these possibilities. We must open the ferry. The ferry must come back so that goods and services can transfer between neighbor islands and Oahu. We need a dairy industry. We need an active, viable farming ag industry. And these are the kinds of things that will create space for the people of Hawaii to live and breathe and not be so dependent on tourism.
Did you say you want to bring back the ferry, like the super ferry? Is that what you're talking about?
That's what I said. I believe that we should have the super ferry. I believe that the Port Authority is in place. I would assume that at this point that the actual ferry is no longer viable, but there's ferries available. How do we get goods from Big Island beef to Oahu? These are tangible solutions. we need the ability for transportation to serve the people, not just serve industry. So the people must have the opportunity to produce goods and service and sell them in the marketplace. And one of the constraints that we have in our state is the lack of transportation and the availability of it. I would assert that not only should the ferry be back, but the ferry system should be nonprofit. The ferry system should be there to serve the people. So, did I say that? Absolutely.
So you're not deterred by the fact that it failed before?
Why did it fail is the question. So if the purpose of the ferry is to serve the people, and we actually have an industry that can utilize the ferry, they go hand in hand. It's not an either or. If the people had the opportunity through zoning and DLNR regulations to actually have active dairy. When was the last time we had a dairy industry here on Oahu? How about beef? How about poultry? How about just simple goods and services? So these are hand in hand. It's a comprehensive perspective, not just one that's designed to create opportunities for specific industries. There has to be an island-wide decision about how these integrated things work for our people.
For Red Hill, the fuel tanks that are underground, there's been so much debate about what to do for them. Where do you stand on this issue? Do you think they should be the fuel taken out? What do you think should be done?
Well, this is another complicated issue. It's not new. When the fuel tanks were first done, they received accommodations as engineering and civil engineering masterpieces. But the problem is they were done in the 40s. And you're storing that much jet fuel above the aquifer over decades. It's inevitable that there are going to be leaks. It's not new. I remember in the 90s hearing about problems with this. When I did a little bit of research, there's been 180,000 gallons that have been somehow, absorbed into our earth. And then the current ones that have come out, the current 27,000 gallon leaks, these were discovered purely by accident. So, one has to look closely at what exactly has transpired. It wasn't that long ago in 2016 when the Department of Health and the EPA gave the facility a green light. They actually said that they have done above industry standards in protecting the water quality of our state. So that is obviously not so, but the nature of gravity and fuel in the ground it's inevitable before we have leaks. So I would say, it needs to go away. The aquifers are the lifeblood of the INA. They are the lifeblood of the people of Hawaii. To have them put at risk by storage facilities that are built in the 40s, certain things are common sense. In Hawaii, you know that that's a problem. So I would say that they need to go away. They need to be capped.
All right, Gary Cordery, a candidate for governor as a Republican. We appreciate your time here on Sunrise.